order to understand the definition of what transgender is, you need to understand what the gender binary is, and a lot of people don't, right? So it's easy to ask, what is transgender? And I can tell you that, being transgender means that your gender identity doesn't align with the sexual the biological sex that you were assigned at birth, right? So I'm assuming if you're a straight male, you're cisgender because you were born with a penis and you identify as male. But if you're transgender, you are born with a penis but you identify as female, right? So your gender identity, which for most people is a construct of male and female, doesn't align with your biological sex. So that's what it means to be transgender. That there was a need for it here at Western. The really cool thing is that they didn't actually receive any pushback from administration on gender-neutral washrooms. Administration supported the initiative wholeheartedly, and now just a couple years later, we've got about 60 gender-neutral washrooms on campus, which is a lot. Because I was at a conference last semester, I think it was in October or at the end of September, and actually there are a lot of post-secondary institutions in Southern Ontario where students are having a lot of trouble with their administration, specifically surrounding transgender accommodation. So I was talking to a few trans students that were mentioning that they can't get funding for LGBT support groups on campus or anything like that. If you go to Lambton College, they only have 2 gender-neutral washrooms on campus compared to our 60, and they're actually on polar opposite ends of the campus. So a trans student who has a class in the middle of campus will need to walk 20 minutes to get to a washroom in which they feel safe, which isn't the case at Western because almost every major building on campus has at least one gender-neutral washroom. The postings for which and the listings for which are all online on the Western Peer Support website, on the Equity and Human Rights Services website, on the Fact Management website. So they're reasonably accessible in that sense. And in terms of other supports on campus, the USC provides some, as well as SDC. So actually just this year, the Student Development Center started its very first trans-positive support group, which is something the university has never done before, but there was an identified need for a support group specifically for those that identify as trans because Pride Western facilitates support groups the last Thursday of every month in the Peer Support Center. But those groups usually take on a more LGBT orientation or LGBT focus. And so there really was a demonstrated need from trans students on campus for a space that really was their own. And so SDC kind of stepped up in that sense, and they're running a trans-positive support group. For the LGBT support groups here at Pride Western, it's run at the Peer Support Center. It's pretty informal. We bring in some facilitators from the community just because the USC coordinators, we're not professionals. We're just students. We're full-time students with no certification. And so for liability reasons, we contract that out to community members. So we bring them in last Thursday of every month. It's pretty informal. They just invite everyone to sit in a circle, and it's basically just an opportunity to share some experiences because I think what you'll find amongst a lot of LGBT students is that one of their most significant challenges is the isolation they feel. A lot of them feel alone, especially with regards to coming out. They're the only non-heterosexual member of their family, and so they find it difficult to find people that they relate to at home. And so really it just gives them an opportunity to, meet with people that they can relate to and talk about some of their challenges. So it's really all about experience sharing in an environment that's, safe and judgment-free with people that are qualified to kind of talk to you about your problems and kind of point you in the right direction if you need help. When you look at any statistics regarding, LGBT students or LGBT people compared to, transgender people, the numbers for transgender people are almost invariably higher. And it's just because even now with a massive cultural shift that's happening, people are, embracing the idea of LGBT emancipation. People are, coming around to the idea of, LGBT people getting married and having kids and adopting and, having civil rights and all that kind of stuff, even in the States, which is great. But the only problem with that is that there really hasn't been a correlating shift in transgender awareness, right? So as much as we like to say, yeah, look at how much progress we're making, gay people can get married in this many states and this many countries. At the same time, there's so much misunderstanding around the issues that trans people face. And that's why you see the numbers the way that they are, right? Because as much as, LGBT people can say, well, I don't feel a part of my school, for transgender people, it's that much harder, mostly because there is so little awareness and so little understanding of even what it is to be trans compared to what it is to be lesbian, gay, or bi. And it really does come down to that understanding factor. Because as easy it is for me to say, okay, I'm gay, and then explain it to someone, a lot of people find it very difficult to understand the concept of the gender binary. And as soon as you start talking about the gender binary, which is particularly pertinent when you're talking about trans issues, people get confused. And people, just are genuinely not necessarily ignorant, but there isn't necessarily a massive interest in trans issues yet, just because there's not that much awareness about it. So when you talk about 69% of trans students that don't feel a part of their school community, I absolutely see that 100%. And you can see that reflected in the people that show up to support groups. You can see that reflected even when you sit down and talk to students at Western. Primarily the turnout for Pride Western events or USC events that focus on LGBT issues. For the most part, you're going to be talking to LGBT students. So absolutely, I can see that reflected a little bit at Western. I don't necessarily think it's because Western itself is a transphobic place. I don't believe that at all. At an administrative level for the USC, making sure that trans students are just as accommodated and just as cared for as other LGBT students is a huge priority. I just think it's more of a broad cultural thing that we're at right now. Again, I think it comes back to that awareness piece, right? So and it really has to do with shifting that conversation. I think the onus is on student leaders like myself and the USC and administration to make sure those conversations are happening, just because when people say the LGBT acronym all the time, but people honestly, they say it and they forget that transgender is part of that acronym. They forget that those issues are kind of just as present as LGBT issues, and I think it comes down to having a conversation about gender and about sexuality that doesn't focus primarily on sexual orientation, right? Because sexual orientation, in the great scheme of things, and if you're talking about gender itself, sexual orientation is one small aspect of your gender identity, right? So for trans people, that's the same principle as sexual orientation, but for trans people, it really is about breaking down that gender binary, and so it's about using university as an opportunity for people to start talking about gender in a way that isn't necessarily black or white or isn't, left or right. And I think it's just about educating people, letting them know that these issues are here. It can be as easy as, encouraging people to correct their language and use proper language or proper pronouns when referring to a trans person. Campus, one thing that I hear pretty consistently is that they actually really do appreciate the number of gender-neutral washrooms on campus. They just wish that they were easier to find, which is something that we've been trying to do this year by making, we made like a color-coded map available on the Western Peer Support website that breaks down all the gender-neutral washrooms by building and shows them on a map. We put up some posters that direct people to that website as well. It really just is about raising awareness about the fact that, we are making these accommodations. They're important to us. We just want to get the word out. And so that was something we heard pretty consistently. And like I said, just in the past, there was just a demonstrated need for trans people to have, their own space, like a trans-positive space that's specific to the issues that they have, and that was developed for the STC this year, which is fantastic. So we're taking steps, and the school is making strides at an institutional level as well as at the level that the USC is concerned about. Just in terms of the work that I've been doing, a lot of what we've been doing is actually focused on raising awareness on trans issues. We had a trans-specific awareness day this year, which I thought was fantastic. So it really is just, we're trying to shift that focus. And for the most part, feedback we hear from students is generally positive about the institution itself. But again, a lot of the issues that we deal with when we're talking about trans people take place on like a more personal level, like when it comes to coming out, dealing with their family, talking to their friends, going through the process of transitioning, all that kind of stuff.